Good morning, everyone. I think this is pretty much where we left off last time on the cold and dark videos, and this is the continuation of our flight to New York JFK. We are at 7,000 feet over the North Carolina coastline in the early morning sun, and let's see what happens on this flight. I'll jump back into the cockpit, and you can see we're tracking the 050 radial outbound from Wilmington VOR, and just leveled off. We're on autopilot at 250 knots. Of course, we cannot fly at 7,000 feet all the way to JFK. We could, but it's not very economical fuel-wise, so let's start the climb out. And ATC calls us and says climb to 25,000 feet, or flight level 250 as they put it. Anything over 18,000 feet in the United States is a flight level. So here we put in flight level 250, hit level change, and you see the mode enunciation changes to N1, MCP speed, the auto throttle advances thrust lever to climb thrust, and the nose pitches up and the airplane starts to climb. You can still see on the altimeter that we're on the altimeter setting for Wilmington 30.00. That's one thing I changed from the last videos. I put in an altimeter setting that's different from standard, just to give me the chance to forget setting the altimeters, so you can laugh at me. So let's hope that doesn't happen. And we are going to climb at standard speeds here. We will fly at 250 knots below 10,000 feet, then accelerate to 290 knots above that, and eventually climb at decimal 70 Mach number. If we even get to that, if we cruise at 25,000 feet, I don't think we'll even reach that speed. Okay, passing 10,000 feet right now. This is time to turn off the inboard landing lights, and you don't need them above 10,000 feet anymore. And I think in the last video I already turned the ignition switches to off. Didn't do it in this video. We usually do it when we raise the flaps to 0 or to up. Then you don't need ignition anymore, and you turn that back on when you extend the flaps. Okay, increasing speed to 290 knots. You see the nose comes down and the plane accelerates. And the pitch with 250 knots is about 10 degrees. Now with 300 knots it will be closer to 5 degrees. And now it is safe for the flight attendants to start the service. So we're going to release them by turning the fasten belt switch to on to auto. And auto is a setting where it will turn on again once you extend the flaps. That's usually pretty late in the approach, too late for them to clear away all the stuff, but it's a good reminder for you that you forgot to turn the fasten belts signs on, and then it's time to call the cabin and apologize and say, sorry, only 8 minutes to go to landing, can you guys do it, or do you need some more time? I think in the last video I already moved the plastic box out of the way. Oops, I like to do that, and of course my co-pilot does it as well. Because if you have them set to something that seems to make sense, it's easy to assume that you already set them accurately when you did. We'll later do that during the approach. We'll use them again. Okay, climbing out at 290 knots. You see the pitch is at about 5 degrees. And now we have some time as we climb up to look outside again, and also see what happened in the cockpit in the last three months. We finished the circuit breaker panel, added some more detail back here. You see the smoke hood, the fire extinguisher, some detail to the seats, the soft and furry sheepskin here that soaks up the sweat of the pilots when they do tough approaches. We finished the back door, and I think the cockpit is coming along quite nicely. Another thing that you want to do during climb out, I think I talked about that before, but you can't stress it enough, is check on the pressurization. Sometimes you take off with the packs and off to gives you full engine power, and it's easy to forget to turn that on. So you want to see that the packs are running, and you want to look up here and see that pressurization in the cabin is working as expected. It's easy to get confused here with these indications. There's the differential pressure on the outside, the cabin altitude on the inside, and this is the cabin rate of climb. Now when an airplane climbs, that's a good thing. When the cabin climbs, that can be a bad thing, especially if it climbs too high, because that means that pressure in the cabin is actually dropping. And that's a little counterintuitive sometimes, and it's really easy to get confused. If you have to check your pressurization, if you're working on standby mode or even manual mode, there's a very handy little scale down here. It gives you the pressurization schedule. On the bottom is the flight altitude. You can see 18,000, 20,000, 22,000 feet. So we're going to cruise at 25,000 feet, and that gives you a cabin altitude of 3,400 feet. So that's what we want to see when we cruise at 25,000 feet. A cabin altitude of 3,400, and we're already at 2,800 about. So it's going to climb a little more. The cabin controller will always try to fly a max pressure schedule. That means it will blow up the cabin as much as it can. That's most convenient for passenger and crew, because obviously then the cabin altitude will be as low as possible, and you can breathe normally. Of course, there's certain warnings. There's a cabin altitude warning horn. The masks will drop automatically if the cabin altitude goes above a certain value. That's not for this flight to demonstrate. We will just do a regular flight, and there's enough stuff to keep up with that already. We passed 18,000 feet. Now it's time to set the altimeters to standard, and if you forget that, the airplane would level off at the wrong altitude. Unlike a more modern aircraft, there's no warning to set the altimeter when you pass the transition altitude. So this is an airplane where you actually have to watch what you're doing, and it works out very well most of the time. Okay, coming up on 25,000 feet, there's another thing that we'll need to do. The current TCAS software standard does not know that you will level off at 25,000 feet. It has no way of knowing what you dialed in up here, and that can be dangerous if there's another airplane cruising at level 260, 1,000 feet above, and you really come barreling up at a high rate. Then the TCAS systems would assume that you climbed into the path of this aircraft, and it would actually trigger an alert in that aircraft and also in your aircraft to reduce the rate, and for them to maybe start climbing, which could lead to all sorts of things. And of course we don't want that, so current standard is to actually reduce the rate of climb when you get within 1,000 feet of your assigned altitude, and further software upgrades will remedy that, but for now we'll do it. So in a minute you will see me select vertical speed and come back to 1,000 feet per minute. We're still looking at the Mach number here, decimal 66. We're not at 70 yet, so we're still going to climb out with 290 knots. And now as we come up to cruising altitude, this is the time where the airline pilot can relax a little bit. Of course, there's things to do and to monitor. You want to check your fuel consumption, you want to check the flight pan, check the times. We did start the clock here at takeoff, so we know we have 12 minutes elapsed since we took off. 2,000 feet to go. It's a standard call out. And but actually as you cruise, there's a little time to talk about stuff and relax a little bit. The more hectic parts of the flights are obviously the departure and the approach, but also the turnaround on the ground, where you have to take care of lots of stuff, make lots of decisions, operational decisions. That's usually where it's most stressful nowadays, at least. There used to be other times. Okay, we're coming up on 24,000 feet. I said we'll go back to vertical speed, so I click that button. It pops to 1,400, and I just dial that down to 1,000, and that gives a nice and smooth approach to the level of altitude. 1,000, that's another standard call out. Whenever you get within 2,000 or 1,000 feet of your assigned altitude, the pilot monitoring, as they're called nowadays, will call that out to increase your awareness that you need to look at what your autopilot is doing. I've never seen it bust in altitude, but it has happened. Or sometimes there's confusion. One pilot dialed in the wrong altitude, the other one didn't check it, and that's like a last-ditch safeguard where you can actually make sure that you and your co-pilots agree as to what altitude you're climbing, where you were cleared to. Alright, let's see the level off happen, and after that I will fast forward this flight to the approach area. Here we go, altitude acquire, and then altitude hold, and we're still at 290 knots. As I said, I'll fast forward the flight now to the when we get to closer to the Sea Isle VOR. That's where the Cameron 4 arrival into JFK starts. So we'll go to your favorite website, get out that approach chart, print it out for you so you can follow along. And today we'll be very lucky, and we will fly the VOR GPS approach, runway 13 left, 13 right, the famous Canarsie approach in JFK. It's not in operation very often, but of course today we can do what we want, and I don't want to fly a boring LS, so that's what we'll do. And this concludes the first part, climb out to flight altitude. One more thing before I forget, you will know if you really paid attention that, so you might have noticed that we put in 27,000 feet here at the flight altitude, but we are only cruising at 25,000 feet. Something will happen related to that. I'll come back to that later, but I'd like to point that out already.